Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it's happened again. For the third time in 9 weeks, yet another horrendous terrorist attack. This one, physically, I was quite close to. I just come over Tower Bridge just before 10 o'clock and on the way towards London Bridge, and there was a roadblock, and we were about, I guess, 10 cars back from that roadblock. Didn't think much of it. Suddenly heard helicopters in the air and thought, perhaps something awful has happened. And it was pretty awful, wasn't it? I suppose the only good thing we got from all of it was that within 8 minutes of the assault on those innocent people crossing London Bridge, within 8 minutes, the police armed response unit, some from the Met and some, I believe, from the City of London Police as well, had arrived on the scene and had shot dead those three men who were attempting and were actually succeeding in physically butchering people who were having a night out in London's Borough Market. So that's the good thing that came out of it, was that we saw that the police are very, very, or in this case, were very effective indeed. And we can all be, I think, enormously proud of them. But of course there is, by the way, I'm trying tonight not really to talk about the general election. I'm trying to talk about how we deal with incidents like this and what our state of preparedness is. But of course, inevitably, it became a political football pretty quickly. Jeremy Corbyn coming under really quite persistent attack, particularly online, from the Conservatives about his shoot-to-kill stance, which, let's put it like this, when it was looked at a year ago, he was pretty reluctant about the concept of shoot-to-kill, although since then he's adopted a very much more robust position. Indeed, today he virtually hinted that Theresa May should actually resign because her record as Home Secretary was so bad. And Steve Hilton, who worked as one of David Cameron's special advisers, now lives in America, did actually say that he thought the Prime Minister should be resigning, not running for re-election. So criticisms going back and forth. Corbyn accused of being soft, May accusing of failing as Home Secretary. But the thing that really interested me was the press conference in Downing Street yesterday and further comments today about the number of authorised firearms officers. And Mrs May said, we're increasing their numbers. Well, let's just look at the facts. Over the course of the last year or so, there has been a slight increase in the number of authorised firearms officers in this country. But it is still a decline of about 700, we reckon here at LBC, since the general election, which took place all the way back in 2010. So what do we have? We have about 6,000 authorised firearms officers in this country, half of whom are in the capital city and the greater metropolitan area of London, the other 3,000 scattered out across the rest of the country. And I guess, whilst I say on the one hand, the only good thing that came from it was we dealt with it in 8 minutes, I just wonder, folks, what would happen if an attack like this, 3 men in a van, run down people, then get out with knives in this case, or God forbid, even guns, and set about a killing spree. I wonder if this happened on a small, remote, coastal town. I wonder whether that town would have an armed response unit. Now, clearly, we can't ask the police that question because they can't tell us everything they know. But if you think about it, if there are only 3,000 authorised firearms officers outside of London across the country, there must be many, many places where people gather in reasonably significant numbers where it would take a very long time indeed for an armed response unit to get there. And I am asking you the question tonight. I want to know what you think. Is it time we armed every single police officer in this country? If you think, yes, we simply have to do this, then call 0345 6060 973. If you're worried about accidents happening, then you can text me on 84850 and you can tweet me on @LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC. And as ever, you can watch us on LBC's Facebook page. And I'm going to go, because let's find out a little bit more about who these attackers were, because this is interesting and it's relevant. And I'm going to go to Vincent McAvenny, LBC's senior reporter. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening. Well, we've had these names released in the past half an hour. One of them is Curran Butt. He is 27 years old, from Barking, East London. We're told he was known to police and MI5, but there was no intelligence to suggest he was likely to carry out an attack. The other attacker has been named by Scotland Yard as Rashid Redouan, 30, from Barking, again in East London. The pair and one other man were shot dead by police 8 minutes after the start of their attack. Police fired some 50 rounds in order to stop them. And the other person involved in this attack, who sprung from the van with them, has not yet been named.
OK, Vincent, and I understand that in the case of Butt, he'd actually appeared in a television documentary called The Jihadis Next Door.
That's right. There are reports that he is featured in this documentary, which aired on Channel 4 last year. He was seen brandishing a so-called Islamic State flag in a London park and praying to it in that documentary. But no word yet on the third person, whether or not he featured in that documentary at all, as he has not yet been named. OK,
Vincent, thank you very much indeed. And a little bit more information from Majid Nawaz, LBC presenter, who, of course, is an expert on radicalisation. And he's making the point that this individual, Butt, was part of the Andram Chowdhury network, which we know to have caused so much harm. So one of them, Butt, was known to us. He'd appeared in a television documentary. He was on the list. He was part of that 23,000 that we talked about the other week. But the other individual, this Rashid Redouan, he wasn't part of that list of 23,000, which, if you think about it, is perhaps even more frightening than knowing that there are 23,000 people the police are actively thinking about. I don't know how many in total there are, but the fact that he wasn't known to us worries me more than the fact that one was known to us. The police did a fantastic job. I understand that one stray round, did hit a member of the public, though not fatally, but there is no way we can criticise the speed and efficiency of the police. But what happens if one of these attacks takes place in a remote, rural, inland, seaside town where the armed response unit are a long way away? Surely it's logical for us to arm and train every single police officer. I'm going to ask Nigel in Guildford, should we arm the police, Nigel? Has that time now come?
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
My basic response would be no. I'm assuming you're thinking that all the policemen would be carrying a sidearm rather than a semi-automatic rifle or submachine gun with night sights.
Yeah, my thinking, Nigel, was, let me give my view, rather than playing devil's advocate. My view is, I think we need a substantial increase in the number of police carrying weapons. Whether it's every single one we can debate, but a very substantial increase. And yes, I would see policemen and policewomen carrying pistols, yes.
Well, the reason I say no is because when I'm over in France, I own a semi-automatic pistol, combat pistol, legally over there, and I shoot with a number of English people, and we have tried to shoot at static targets at different distances, 5 metres, 7 metres, 12 metres, one after the other, and you can easily miss. Now, you can imagine on Saturday night, if you were a policeman who's not practised on that a lot, you're running over a bridge, you might be out of breath, you've got to draw your weapon, make sure it's cocked, take the safety off, and then you've got to pinpoint your target, probably a headshot you would need, amongst loads of other people. So your dilemma would be, maybe I will, maybe I won't. And if you take a shot and miss and kill somebody or injure somebody, that would be awful for the policeman.
Yes, it would, Nigel, but what would equally be awful is not to be armed and to see those people stabbing to death yet more people.
Hobson's choice, really. But what I'm saying, from my own practice at static targets with my friends, if you don't practice 3 or 4 times a week, which probably the armed response units may well do, I'm not sure, you are putting a policeman into an awful position where he's got to make a decision, and he could make a big mistake and kill somebody or kill several people. That's the big dilemma.
I do completely understand the validity of that argument, but equally, and yes, I do accept that accidents. If you arm people, accidents will happen. An innocent member of the public on Saturday night in Borough Market got hit by a stray round. That is, mercifully, the individual did not die from it. But yes, I do accept the risk, but I feel that risk is lower than the risk of being unarmed if something awful happens where you're a long, long way away from the current armed response teams. And Nigel, let me just tell you something. I, myself, when I was in America, I went to visit a police academy in a state in America where they train the police, where they test the police, and where they regularly update the police to make sure they are of sufficient standard. And like you, I fired those pistols at static targets, and it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So I do accept your point, but surely, Nigel, if we did have the right level of training, if we did make sure people kept up to date with their practice, surely there's an argument for enlarging the number of armed police in Britain from 6,000 people.
If you could do that, then fine. But I should think technically it would be difficult. And then you've got to take those policemen off the beat, haven't you, so to speak?
Yes.
Do the training, and they've got to be doing it all the time. You can't do a couple of weeks and then, I'll go down a month's time. You've got to be doing it all the time.
Nigel,
I don't think would be practically possible.
Nigel, you make the point very well. Nigel making the point that, guns are dangerous, things can go wrong. I'm of the view we need to arm a lot more of our police officers. I'm asking you to tell me whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong on that. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. After the horrors of London Bridge and Borough Market on Saturday night, I'm asking you whether it's time for us to arm all of our police officers. Now, Cressida Dick, who is the boss of the Metropolitan Police, has given her opinion today. She does not think we need to arm more of her police. She thinks, actually, what Saturday showed is we've got it about right. That if within 8 minutes of an incident, the armed units are there and they've shot dead the terrorists, which, I have to say, is impressive by anybody's standards, she thinks that that's OK and there's no need. I would just say to Cressida Dick, you're running the Metropolitan Police. You're not running, a sparsely populated county made up of small market or seaside towns. And that's why I think we need to arm a lot more of our police. On Twitter, Libby says, absolutely, the 8-minute response only works in London. Jessie says, police must be adequately armed in order to protect the public. I get... on Twitter, I live in a small town. It would take 1 to 2 hours for the armed police to get down there as they've closed the local police station. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but I certainly think it would take quite a long time to get to many small towns in this country. Jane says to me by text, no, not all police to be armed, more tasers required. Well, OK, that's perhaps a compromise position. Kathy Wiltshire says, all police should be armed for their own safety. We need to toughen up. What use is a plastic baton going to do against a knife-wielding lunatic? Well, Kath, you do make a very good point. And let's just remember, shall we, that PC Keith Palmer, who was in his police uniform outside the Houses of Parliament, was unarmed and he was stabbed to death. Perhaps if he and his colleagues had been armed, he wouldn't have been stabbed to death. And also remember that on London Bridge on Saturday night, there was one out-of-uniform policeman that tried to intervene, but there was an in-uniform policeman that took on a knife-wielding lunatic, and he was carrying only a baton. Imagine if he'd been properly trained and he was carrying a small pistol, he could have dispatched with one or maybe more of them there and then before they'd even got into Borough Market. And I know that Nigel from Guildford, who himself shoots pistols in France, made the point that it's a tough discipline and you need to practice a lot. But I think actually, my own view, it's worth the investment. Tell me I'm right. Tell me I'm wrong. Daniel in Hendon, what do you think?
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening.
Yes, I agree with yourself, and I also agree with your previous caller, Nigel.
Yes.
We need to arm far more of our police. But, and this is a big but, we need to have the safeguards. There's a considerable amount of technology out there that allows, I mean, if you do arm all the police in Britain, there's always the danger that the police themselves will become targets because of the firearms that are sitting by their sides, and gangs will want to get them. So you need to start thinking about technology like calibrating the firearms to police DNA, and sounds far-fetched, but it is out there at the moment.
So are you saying, Daniel, that if the police are known to carry weapons, you effectively up the ante? Perhaps even house burglars might start carrying weapons.
You're going to get to the point where if you bring a knife, they're going to bring a gun. If they bring a gun, they're going to bring something else. It's going to get that escalation. What we don't want is the same thing that happens in America, where the police become gun happy or gun ho, so to speak. Yeah. What we need to do is we need to put in the safeguards. If we're going to arm more of our police officers, which I completely agree with, you need to put in far more safeguards. And on top of that, you also need to have a very, very long review of the firearms laws in this country, especially when it comes to training with handheld firearms. You can train with assault rifles. You simply can't train with handheld firearms at the moment. And that's
because we banned handguns after Dunblane, isn't it?
Yes, accepted, but it needs to. There are many responsible, like your previous caller said, that go all the way to France. Now, we need to get to the point where, obviously in the security industries as well, you've got people that would like to do this kind of training, would be an asset as well. What I'm trying to say is that if there was more facilities for police officers and... No, Daniel, of course, they've got to have that. I mean, I wonder, is there a compromise? I had a previous text. Here's another one. Saeed says, I'd agree to rubber bullets and tasers for all police alongside the current... I mean, would that make sense to you, Daniel? Absolutely. The thing is, you've got to think about the basically the environment. You've got to think about the non-lethal techniques as well. You've got tasers, like you said, rubber bullets, bullets, all these kind of things that can be deployed at a moment's notice. But at the same time, we need to remember that if you've got a terrorist and he's got his finger on the detonator, the only way to remove that terrorist immediately is to do the worst, the unthinkable. Now, as I said, when they're doing unspeakable things, we have to take we have to take action that previously might have been seen to be unthinkable, Daniel. But listen, I thank you for your call. I get your point, similar to the previous one, that it is the right thing to do, but we have to be careful how we do it. Laura says the UK police should have been armed for decades. Fred says, why do the Northern Ireland police have guns? Because of terrorism. What about London? Where's the highest threat? Jerry says a taser won't stop the terrorist bullets. Adam says, armed with rubber bullets, maybe, they can incapacitate attackers. I wonder what Alistair in Croydon makes of this debate. Is it a good thing to arm more of our police, Alistair, as I think it probably is?
I think it is. I'm a bit worried about the prospects of having all our police armed. I think it would be a good idea to have more specialist armed response units nationwide.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a good idea for all officers to be carrying arms routinely.
What do you think would go wrong, Alistair?
Well, it's a very... They could, in a split second, they have to make a decision. And as we know from history, mistakes can be made. And as one contributor said to, I think it was on Ian Dale's programme the other day, where he trains officers, he regularly tests the water with the officers he's training.
Yeah.
And for over the years, the message is constantly the same. They don't want to be armed as a matter of course. And in fact, some officers will actually walk away from the force rather than be forced to carry an arm. So that's the last thing we want. I think the officers who are prepared to go down that route and then go to be specialists, I think they should be have the resources provided for the force to do that.
So, Alistair, what you're saying is let's have more specialists but not arm all of them, basically.
Absolutely.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I get a tweet here, an anonymous tweet here, and I do believe it. He says, "Hi, Nigel. I'm a firearms officer in the Met. We do need more officers patrolling, even if only with a sidearm. No doubt about it. And my guess is, I have to say, the policemen I've spoken to do feel they need more capacity than they've currently got. Taser is pointless and not guaranteed to work every time. Ask a taser-trained policeman, I get on SMS. Louis from Ilford, good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Yeah, having listened to the two previous callers, I think, I agree with them. We do need more officers armed, but we certainly don't need, or we shouldn't want, officers, every single officer armed throughout the country. I think that would be far too expensive on the taxpayer. And also, I served with Lincolnshire Police for 3 years.
OK.
When I was 19 to 22. Only 3 years, not a great deal of experience, but enough to know how operationally the policing in the UK works, also particularly in Lincolnshire. And I know that armed response numbers in Lincolnshire have been cut by a third over the last 3 years in Lincolnshire, Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire combined.
So Louis, without giving away any trade secrets, let's think about Lincolnshire. Let's say Skegness, right? Skeggy. It's on the coast. It's got a population of 20,000 people. Let's say, God forbid, something awful happened in Skegness. How quickly, in your opinion, could an armed response unit get there?
OK, good question. The answer would probably be about 20 minutes. There is an armed response unit attached to Skegness. There's also one at Lincoln, Boston. They've removed the one from Grantham now. So essentially, probably 20 minutes, because they're county-wide now, and they also cover Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire. So Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire and Lincolnshire Police. Policing now. So essentially 20 minutes, 25 minutes, which is, in any event, too long, whichever way you look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm being asked a question here, and you're going to answer it for me. I'm being asked a question here by text, which says, what would happen if there were 3 attacks happening simultaneously over a 100-mile radius?
The policing now throughout the UK is cross-border, i.e. counties, Lincolnshire, Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire. They're the 3 that I'm most familiar with. We'd be screwed, essentially. Quite honestly, we'd be screwed.
So would it make sense, then? Would it make sense for some or all of the active police officers in Skegness to carry a weapon of some kind?
I think it would make sense for there to be more armed officers county-wide. Yeah. I wouldn't say necessarily Skegness, but if we were to have Mablethorpe, Skegness, and if the terrorists just really push the boundaries in those areas, maybe Cleethorpes, we would be absolutely screwed. Even if there was to be one in Lincoln, one in Newark, for example, which is in Nottinghamshire, we would be screwed. There wouldn't be enough armed officers, and there wouldn't be enough officers, quite honestly. I mean, Stamford, Bourne, Deeping, there are normally only 8 officers on throughout a shift. And that's to cover, I think, a 200-square-mile radius. So really not enough officers. And that's the same throughout the country, too.
And would you also... I mean, how would you also respond to the argument that there are 20,000 fewer police officers than there were 7 years ago? Is that part of the problem, too?
Yeah, well, absolutely, without a doubt. Yeah, as I say, there's 8 officers covering 200 square miles in Lincolnshire. Yeah. Absolutely unacceptable in its entirety, and this is what it's like throughout the country. Yeah. So, I mean, we really are in big trouble here. If there is to be a terrorist attack, we really are screwed, like I've said. You have brought some really important information to this debate, Liz. I thank you very, very much for that phone call. I can't say I'm very cheered up by it, but I thank you for it. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. With only 6,000 authorised firearms officers in this country, is it time to arm our police forces? That's the question I'm asking you. I am very much in favour of a big extension in the numbers. And so far, most of you are too. But if you think this is completely wrong, if you think by doing that we would up the stakes and actually make all levels of crime potentially worse and more violent, then let me know. Another subject that has interested me for some years has been the sources of funding for extremist views and extremist preachers in some of the mosques in this country. I have been openly critical of Saudi Arabia now for some considerable time. Interestingly, under David Cameron, there was a commission set up to establish where the funding was coming from for many of the extremist groups in this country. And now we're told, a suggestion comes to us through the Independent newspaper, that the results of this Home Office inquiry now may not be published because it would be too embarrassing to realise just how much money had come into Britain from Saudi Arabia or perhaps even from Qatar. And Jeremy Corbyn and Tim Farron have challenged Theresa May over this. So I am going to agree with Jeremy Corbyn and with Tim Farron. I think this report should be published. Oh, yes, I know
We sell aerospace things to Saudi Arabia. It's good for our exports. But you know what? Money, earning income from Saudi Arabia matters to me far less than actually extremists being radicalised in this country. If I'm right in saying that. Whether I'm right or wrong, surely this Home Office report, which has been over 2 years in its gestation, should be up for public view. Any thoughts on that? Let me know, please. Gareth says on Facebook, all police should cover your pistol at the minimum, plus a taser. Andrew says, I live in a town of circa 35,000 people with a brand new police station, but only manned between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. The nearest police station is 10 miles away. How does that work? I've got a suggestion here by text. You need to have trained local people who already have a licence. Well, that would be a little bit like, wouldn't it? Sort of extending into some form of National Guard that you would call out in time of emergency. I think whoever sent that to me, we're a very long way away from that. If we're not even arming our police, I very much doubt we're going to allow civilians to take things into their own hands. Can we not train the army to cover areas at less risk? Says Rachel in Lancashire. Rachel, I was waiting for that. I was hoping somebody would say that, because I remember, a few years ago, suggesting that if we did have a major civil emergency, the obvious thing to do was to call the army in. Of course, I was met with the usual barrage of abuse. One of the problems, Rachel, is our army is now so very small. It is smaller than it's been at any time since before the Napoleonic Wars. But yes, in a crisis, at least, infantry soldiers on the streets have been fully trained in using weapons of all kinds. Matthew in Leicester, should we arm more or all of our police officers?
Yes and no.
Okay, go on.
I was actually involved in quite an incident myself many years ago.
Okay.
I used to run pubs, restaurants and hotels, and in a rural location in Oxfordshire, which is where this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I was coming onto shift, and my deputy manager came up to me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but there's a guy in the garden and he's got a rifle."
Oh, gosh.
We had a quick look at him. He was rather unhinged, to put it politely.
Yep.
And he started screaming at his pint before he picked up his rifle and started pointing it at people. It was in its case at this point, I should probably add. Now, we immediately called 999, as you do, and we were informed that the local authorised firearms officers were actually training and that they wouldn't be able to get to us for 25 to 30 minutes.
That was really reassuring, Matthew, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We were then told that because local officers didn't have relevant protection or training, they were unable to attend.
Oh.
So it was at this point that I looked at my deputy manager and
Unbelievable.
I thought, you know what, we may end up having to do something ourselves here. Anyway, he left the building, started walking down the high street, which, as you can imagine, it was a Friday afternoon, middle of summer, very, very full. Caused lots of panic, lots of outcry. I would imagine the 999 switchboard was completely off the hook.
Yeah.
He made his way to the bus station, where he tried forcing his way onto a bus. Now, this, as I say, was in the afternoon. There were children trying to get home from school. Fortunately, it was a local dog handler who was taser armed, did actually turn up, and, he succumbed to the taser.
Why would Matthew, why would a dog handler have a taser?
I believe a lot of dog handlers, I could be wrong with this, so please don't quote me, but I believe a lot of dog handlers, particularly within the Thames Valley Force area, are now routinely armed with taser.
OK, fine. Matthew, one other little question to this extraordinary story. You said there was a moment when you thought we might have to take this into our own hands. What did you mean by that?
Yes. If it looked like he was going to get a bit aggressive, I genuinely thought that two of us would probably outnumber the one person and we would have to overpower him. My deputy manager was a former rugby player and he was a prop, so he's a big boy. And we genuinely thought we may have to wrestle him and try and disarm him.
Wow.
Not the kind of situation you want to find yourself in, but no. I'm sure you can imagine when push comes to shove and you've got families in your restaurant, you then have to think to yourself, you may need to do something.
But Matthew, when you've got a situation like that, and you call the local police, and they're not allowed to attend because they haven't been trained and they're not armed, isn't that simply ludicrous?
It is, and the point that I would like to make is that I don't believe all officers should be routinely armed. We are the envy of the world. If you look at the Commissioner of the New York Police, they're absolutely in awe of us over there. And you've been over to America many, many times. You'll absolutely hear them saying the same things. They really wish that their police officers could do what our police officers could do, and they are fantastic. What I think we should do, however, is there are some units within the police force that are authorised firearms officers but do not routinely carry them. Now, there are a lot of local stations that are not necessarily open to the general public throughout the day or for whatever, but we could turn them into localised hubs. And so within local beat officers, officers within a local area, they could become authorised firearms officers when needed. So if a situation like this arose, that particular officer that could not attend would be able to go to the station, grab his firearm, don what he needs to do, and then attend the situation, cutting the response time down from 25 to 30 minutes to potentially 10, 15, dependent on where he is. That can make all of the difference. And I believe that just the sheer knowledge that there are officers in your area that have the ability to do this would maintain our own forces being able to keep the morals and the standards that they currently employ, but have the safety and the security of the general public.
That's a fascinating phone call, Matthew, and you've been through a bit of this, and clearly the response was wholly inadequate, but Matthew offering a compromise so that police officers in rural Oxfordshire would not need to carry firearms but could access them, or others could access them very quickly. Matthew, thank you for that fascinating phone call. Jock says to me on Twitter, maybe we can all have guns, Nigel. That would be even safer, wouldn't it? Do you know, I have to say, Jock, I look at the gun crime statistics in America, where in many states there is free open carry of guns, and the evidence is that the more people carry guns, the more likely they are actually to use them. So I'm not quite sure I buy into that. I get one here. My concern is that the police can't cover all major landmarks and that the terrorists will just then go to the unguarded landmarks. That's the point I am making. Another one, I suggest a fully trained elite squad who are based all over the UK. Well, yeah, that would be an extension of what we already have. And I'm going to go to Facebook messages. Caroline says, good idea to have local people trained in firearms, just as we trained first aid responders in local areas. Well, Caroline, kind of backing this idea of getting civilians involved in what would be a disaster situation. I don't think the country's quite ready for that. After all, we haven't even accepted the point of arming police officers, let alone getting civilians involved. However good idea it may or may not be, Caroline. Our response unit did an amazing job on Saturday night, and within 8 minutes of the terrorist attack starting, they'd shot 3 of them dead inside Borough Market, and we're all very, very proud of the incredible professional job they did in tough circumstances. But my worry is, what if something like this happens in a rather more scattered, rural or coastal part of the country, where response times, and we have had former police officers on, reassuring us that in most of the country, within 20 to 25 minutes, an armed response force of some kind could be there. I worry how much damage could be done in that time, and I'm asking you, should we arm every single police officer in this country? I'm going to go to Mike in Harwich in Essex.
Yeah,
Mike, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well.
Good. I'm ex-Met.
Yep.
Retired several years now.
Okay.
Going back to the mid-'80s when I joined, we had AFOs based at every borough. And what used to happen, if there was an incident, they had to return to the station. A superintendent would authorise them to issue firearms, which was based in the station office, along with ammunition. Then they would go and deal with whatever it was. Obviously, that's still going to take time, but I think an AFO should be on every shift.
Tell us, Mike, you know, you're an ex-policeman. Explain to the public AFO.
Authorised Firearms Officer.
Thank you. And were you one of those?
No. I never carried a firearm in the police. although I would have done if offered. That's another point. I think all officers should be armed unless they opt out.
Okay.
I think all officers should have tasers unless they opt out.
But, Mike, if we decide that the police force are inadequately armed at the moment, carrying their batons, surely a police officer can't opt out of having at least a taser.
Yeah, officers with consciences, there are officers there that will never, ever take up arms, but I'm sure that most would, especially a taser. The other thing, you had the figures earlier with 6,000 armed officers.
That's right.
Well, don't forget there's 4 shifts. 3 shifts and 1 annual leave.
I know. Well, that's what worries me, Mike.
Well, you've got 750 officers, 3 per car.
Yep.
ARVs do have 3 in a car. So when you think, OK, London is fairly well covered, but you go to somewhere like, I don't know, Colchester, Harlow, any largest town, where's the cover for those? You've got 750 officers in 250 cars that are perhaps not annual leave or they're refs or whatever. We are so understaffed. So understaffed. And I really dread somewhere like, I don't know, Clacton's 45,000 people in there, 45 to 50,000. The nearest large firearms police station, I believe, is Colchester, 18 miles away.
On what is what is actually a very slow road. I know that with sirens and everything you can move people away, but you're right. It would take a long time, wouldn't it?
So that's what the main point. They really, really must. Also, what I did get when I was in the IPCC, they jump from great height on anyone that actually fires a gun. They are guilty until proven innocent. You wouldn't believe the pressure these lads and lasses are under. Enormous pressure. And I know lots and lots of firearms officers that have given their ticket in. There's too much hassle because it takes 18 months to 2 years to clear, or then they go and grip the rail, or whatever. It is a scandal that the IPCC... I know we've got to be seen to be legal, but the pressure these people are under is enormous.
It's very difficult. So, Mike, is the answer we should start training thousands of our police officers right now?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mike from Harwich, experienced, understands how it used to work, worried we are simply under-resourced in terms of armed firearms officers. AFOs in his ex-Met speak. Nia in Chelsea, should we arm more of our or all of our police officers?
Hello, Nigel. Yes, I agree that we should do that. But is it going to really stop these attacks? Is my question. Is it going to stop these attacks if we're going to arm more police officers?
It may not, no, it may not stop the attacks, but it may reduce the risk of one of those attacks turning into something on a mass casualty scale. And by the way, I'm not playing down the fact that I think there are 6, maybe now 7 dead from the attack on London Bridge and Borough Market. There are 6 people missing, as I understand it, and 18 in a critical condition. So I'm not playing down near in any way what happened in London Bridge. But what I would say is if those 3 guys had not been taken out, I wonder what the casualty figure would have been.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm not saying that we shouldn't arm police officers. What I'm trying to say is the problem is somewhere else. That these attacks going to happen.
Yes.
And they're not going to stop because the ideology and because Muslims are united. I'm an ex-Muslim. My parents are Muslim. I'm from Middle East. I went to Islamic school. I know what's happening in their mind. I know what they want to destroy. They want to destroy Europe. They want to destroy Western societies. And the politicians, are ignoring the facts, and they're ignoring ex-Muslims. They're ignoring us. They don't, basically, whatever Theresa May or all other politicians are saying, they don't make sense at all, because the problem is somewhere else. The problem is they need to shut down all the mosques, all the Islamic schools,
Well, Nia.
All the Sharia... I'm an ex-Muslim. I know what's happening.
Nia, I will at some point in the next few days have a whole programme about dealing with the causes, dealing with the roots of the problem, because I do feel, actually, a lot of what's been said over the weekend is somewhat inadequate in that regard. But right now, tonight, what I'm talking about is, a serious crisis blows up. How do you deal with it? So, Nia, my answer to you is, it won't stop all of the attacks, but it will prevent, hopefully, any single one of them becoming an event on a mass Paris scale. Thank you. Ivan says on Facebook, terrorists are happy to die, so police with guns won't deter them. No, Ivan, I agree, but it might stop them in their tracks quickly before they can do maximum damage. John says the time is coming when the public will arm themselves unless we see big changes in addressing this crisis. Well, John, it's not actually that easy, I don't think, to get firearms in this country, or at least handguns in this country. Possible, but not easy. Sproz says, why don't we have the military on our streets? Everyone seems scared of this, but we had them for the Olympics. And my last call of the evening is going to be Julie in Ashford. Julie, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I know I've got to be quick.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
So I was in London on Friday. I felt very uneasy up there because I can see that there is no police presence around the stations. But anyway, forgetting that, I live in Ashford.
Yep.
And I have looked into this, and basically our closest response team, armed response team, is in Maidstone, which is a 20-minute journey, which you can see the damage that somebody let loose in the way they were on Saturday could do so much damage. I mean, also, I would like to say that I'm so sorry for everybody. I'd like to just get
absolutely,
yeah. But we are so open, and I think we need pockets of police officers dotted around, maybe a team of 4 that are trained in response to be able to act so quickly.
Well, Julie, your story absolutely backs up what Louis said earlier. Do you remember Louis was on earlier, former police officer from Lincolnshire, and he said across most of the country the response time would be 20 to 25 minutes. So, Julie, you're absolutely in that bracket. So would you like to see these response teams, what sort of more of them scattered across the whole of Kent, basically?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very difficult to arm everybody because they need the training. So I think you need to select a few people from each team and put them in a correct position, arm them, and then spread it out. But get that going straight away to start with. Get it going immediately. Yep. So you've got people in these positions where they can attend within the 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Get there, all right, 8 minutes is still too long, but you can't arm everybody straight away because they need the training.
No.
Get little forces in place, get them going. No. Four armed police, I think, could come and they could,
shorten that time. No, Julie, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Typical, I think, of the way many people feel around this country. My final thought is, I think almost all of you thought the police should at least have tasers. If nothing else, every police, man and woman, should carry a taser. I think the tale we had from rural Oxfordshire of somebody around, a deranged individual with a rifle, and the local police unable to deal with him because they hadn't been trained to do it, they hadn't got weapons, is mad. More armed police officers will make us safer. That's my view.